So if you will turn to Revelation chapter 3, and we're going to be looking at just these few verses. So perhaps you're thinking, well, so few verses, we'll go home early. And perhaps you're right. Now when Revelation 3:20 was read, I don't know how many of you were startled by it. Perhaps not. Perhaps we think, I've heard that all my life, since I was knee-high to a grasshopper. But my eyes nearly popped out when I looked at that verse. You know how you can read something in the Bible many, many times, and it can just kind of just go right by, and then all of a sudden you read it, and it hits you, kind of like a Mack truck. So let's read this passage again, as it were, for the very first time. Are we getting anything up there? No, we're not. Do we need to switch it, or do we...
1 second.
Okay. So we're going to read this, Revelation 3:20. Here I am. I stand at the door and knock. If anyone hears my voice and opens the door, I will come in. Now here we can switch over to the Living Bible. Look, I've been standing at the door, and I'm constantly knocking. If anyone hears me calling him and opens the door, I will come in and fellowship with him and he with me. So you say, what's so startling about that? What's surprising? It's just this. This is to the Laodicean church, right? The church in Laodicea. It is a Christian church. And yet, Jesus is on the outside. He's on the outside, knocking, asking to come in. How can a church be a Christian church without Christ? How can a church be the remnant church and Jesus is on the outside asking to come in? So how can a church be Christian without Christ? How can it be the remnant church if Jesus is not in it? Is the church the remnant church just because it happens to be in the last days? You know, you've all attended the evangelists, and the evangelists will illustrate this with a bolt of cloth. And you go into the, what do you call it, fabric store? And you go to the remnants, and these are what's left of the bolt of cloth after everything else has been sold. When I was in Georgia, Dalton area is the carpet capital of the world. So every time I needed a carpet, whether for the church or whether for my home, I'd go up to Dalton and go directly to the factory and buy a remnant. And I got it for a fraction of what I'd have to pay if I were just buying the piece. And sometimes when you buy a remnant, you might get more than you want. But that's okay. I was able to carpet my house twice, since carpets do wear out. Is that the concept that the Bible has of remnant? You're the remnant. If the church exists in the end of time, it's the remnant church no matter what. Probably not. Or is it rather the remnant are the few who remain faithful to God when the vast majority are unfaithful? And this is the concept, I believe, of the remnant, whether it was the Jews during the time of the Babylonian captivity, or perhaps even after the Babylonian captivity, the Jews that existed at any time. God pointed out that there was a remnant. And that remnant was those few who were faithful to God in spite of all the rest of the Jews that might have been unfaithful. So, can a church leave Christ standing outside the door and be the remnant church? Well, it is something for us to think about. Now, after diagnosing this church's problem, and prescribing a cure, which we observed last week for those of you that weren't here, Jesus throws in a seemingly unrelated statement. Do we have it now? We do. Those whom I love, I rebuke and discipline. Now, that's not exactly what we like to hear. You know, our children don't like to hear it when we talk about discipline, and we don't take it any better. First, we're told that we're wretched and pitiful and poor and blind and naked. And now we're informed that we're like a naughty child and we need to be disciplined. This isn't only found in Revelation. There are other passages in Scripture which refer to this, and it also refers to how unpleasant that discipline may be. So in Hebrews we read, our fathers disciplined us for a little while and they thought it best, but God disciplines us for our good, that we may share in His holiness. And then he goes on to say that no discipline seems pleasant at the time, but rather painful. Later on, however, it produces a harvest of righteousness and peace for those who have been trained by it. Have you ever been in a place, wherever in public, maybe even in somebody's home, and you thought, that child needs a good swat on the backside? Anybody ever experienced anything like that? Well, I have to admit, the thought did cross my mind once or twice. One time I was in the post office, and while waiting in line, you know, to mail whatever I had, I observed a couple of undisciplined kids. They were running around the post office and pulling out the stuff. You know, the post office has different kinds of stuff there, whether for mailing overseas or all kinds of papers and things there. So these kids were running around, pulling out all the papers and throwing them around the post office. And the woman, whom I assumed to be the mother, once in a while she looked over there and very gently and quietly asked them to cease and desist their rowdy behavior. But the rowdiness continued unabated. And nothing more from the apparent guardian than an occasional request that they stop. Other people in line had other thoughts, but I'm sure that we've all witnessed such disruptive shows of poor manners. And we wonder, why don't the parents do something? The assumption being that a little discipline could prevent a great deal of wicked behavior of spoiled brats. A little discipline would help a child and society. And we think that would be the loving thing to do. As I was reading this passage here in Revelation, this is another one of those kind of like aha things when I'm reading. All of a sudden it hit me. I wonder if the angels and the unfallen beings watching from other worlds look down on this planet, think a similar thought. Those humans need a little bit of discipline. And oftentimes we do, and Jesus promises to give it to us because He loves us. And that's gospel. You know, sometimes we think gospel is all this good and flowery and pleasant stuff, but gospel is also that God loves us in spite of us being wretched and miserable and poor and blind and naked. And He's going to do whatever it takes to turn us around and get us headed in the right direction. That's gospel. God loves us in spite of us being wicked, and He's going to give, as He says here, a little discipline to help us go in the right way. So we shouldn't be too quick to pray that God removes it. You know, we all, when we get into a little bit of unpleasantries in life, little hardships, little trials, we pray that God removes these. But perhaps we shouldn't be quite so hasty, because maybe some of these trials could be of a benefit. And this is the approach that Paul took. Paul says, I did pray. I prayed for 3 times. I prayed that the Lord would take it away from me. But he said to me, my grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. Amen. Therefore, Paul says, therefore, I will boast all the more gladly about my weaknesses, so that Christ's power may rest on me. That is why, for Christ's sake, I delight in weaknesses, in insults, and hardships, and persecutions, and difficulties. For when I am weak, then I am strong. Do we take that position? That's a hard one. You know, it's a hard one. When the trials are rough and we're suffering a bit, it's kind of hard to see things the way Paul sees them, that these are good. And he says, I delight. I don't think I got so far yet that I delight. I mean, I'm happy if I get to the place where I can not complain. But Paul says, I delighted in these weaknesses and hardships and persecutions, because it is thereby that I become strong. Jesus not only uses the rod, but he also holds out the carrot. And in Revelation 3:21 here, to him who overcomes, I will give the right to sit with me on my throne, just as I overcame and sat down with my Father on his throne. Again, as I read this, it just jumped out at me, and I thought, wow, what a promise, incomprehensible. Wretched, pitiful, poor, blind, naked. That's what he said about us. And yet he promised us a place on his throne with the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords, sitting next to Jesus on God's throne. Totally awesome. The promise isn't just here in Revelation. Look over in Hebrews chapter 12, verse 2. He says, let us fix our eyes on Jesus, the author and perfecter of our faith, who for the joy that was set before him endured the cross, scorning its shame, and sat down at the right hand of the throne of God. And then we go on in 2 Timothy, where he says, here is a trustworthy saying, if we died with him, we also will live with him. If we endure, we also will reign with him. Awesome! To think that we here, the black blot of the universe, and when you consider the billions, they say there's 100 billion constellations, and each constellation has 100 billion planets. And what that is in exponential terms, I don't know. But we're considering a vast and humongous universe. What we see more of all the time. I was looking the other day at something that was showing some of the new pictures that we have of the universe from the repaired Hubble telescope. And it's just awesome. And when we think that we are the one black sheep of the entire universe, and God said that you're going to sit with me on my throne, and as Paul writes in 2 Timothy 2 here, that we are going to reign with him. We're not just going to be sitting there, doing nothing, but he says, you're going to reign with me. I believe this is a reflection taken from back in Daniel chapter 7. And we can look briefly there at Daniel 7, where he says, beginning verse 9, as I looked, thrones were set in place, and the Ancient of Days took his seat. His clothing was as white as snow, and his hair of his head was white as wool. His throne was a flaming fire, and his wheels were ablaze. Oops, I went too fast there. And in the vision of the night I looked, and there before me was one like unto the Son of Man, coming with the clouds of heaven. He approached the Ancient of Days and was led into his presence. He was given authority and glory and sovereign power. All peoples, nations, and every language worshiped him. His dominion is an everlasting dominion that will not pass away, and his kingdom is one that will never be destroyed. Oftentimes, ever since I think that I was in high school and college and seminary, I've often thought of this verse here in terms of the eschatological judgment scene. But as I was reading here in Revelation and then went back and looked at Daniel, it grabbed me that he's looking at more than the start of the judgment scene. He's giving us the incarnation, the enthronement of Jesus when Jesus left earth in the clouds of heaven and he went up, and then Daniel sees him coming. The Son of Man. You remember Jesus often used the term the Son of Man, taken from this very verse in Daniel. The Son of Man approaching the Ancient of Days, and to him was given authority, glory, and sovereign power, that all nations and all men of every language would worship him. That happened when Jesus ascended from this earth. And his kingdom will never be destroyed. Well, let's go on, because what we were talking about here is us sitting with him on his throne. So we've seen the enthronement of Jesus following the resurrection. In verse 27, then the sovereignty, the power, and greatness of the kingdom under the whole heaven will be handed over to, is it up there? To who? To the saints. That's awesome. All of this is going to be handed over to the saints, the people of the Most High, and his kingdom will be an everlasting kingdom, and all rulers will worship and obey him. It is just totally awesome to see what God is doing. This church, we talked about this last week, this church had a uniqueness about it. Do you remember that? It was the only church of the seven of which God couldn't find a single good thing to say. You don't find any commendation of the Laodicean church. And yet, this church, which he jumps right in and starts telling the church their failings without any commendation before, he gets down to the end and it has the most amazing reward. This is the church that he promises that you're going to sit with me on my throne, just as I overcame and I went up and I was enthroned and sat down with my Father on his throne. He says, you're going to sit with me on my throne. And he's going to hand over to the saints and the people of the Most High the kingdom, which will be an everlasting kingdom. It's really just too awesome. As we used to say when I was in high school, I think it just blows the mind. We who are wretched and miserable and poor and blind and naked are promised that if we invite Jesus in, we will be elevated to the highest position in heaven, the throne of God. Incomprehensible. I was thinking unbelievable, but if God said it, I believe it, and that's good enough for me. So it's believable, but it's incomprehensible. The same Jesus who came and was presented to the Father and enthroned with the Father said that we will come and be enthroned with him. But then there's that picture that we began with. The picture of Jesus knocking at the door, standing outside, begging to be allowed in. Will we respond? There's a story in the Old Testament, in the book of Song of Solomon. We really don't preach too much from the Song of Solomon, but this particular part of the Song of Solomon, I think, ties in very well with these verses in Revelation. Solomon's lover is waiting for him to come. And is so often the case, the man is busy elsewhere. And he doesn't come, you know, she's waiting and he comes late. Like the 10 virgins of Jesus' parable, she falls asleep and then he comes. So now we pick up the story at that place. She says, I slept, but my heart was awake. In other words, she was thinking about the lover that she was waiting and he didn't come. And so she finally fell asleep, but her heart was still thinking of him. Then she says, listen, my lover's knocking. Now, we're switching over to him. He says, open to me, my sister, my darling, my dove, my flawless one. I just want to backtrack here, not backtrack, but sidestep a little bit. Men, brethren, the girls like to hear that kind of talk. So take a note from Solomon here. My darling, my dove, my flawless one. Particularly that flawless one part. They like you to admit that. My head is drenched with dew, and my hair with the dampness of the night. Now she thinks, we're going back to the girl inside in her room. She thinks, I've taken off my robe. Must I put it on again? I've washed my feet. Must I soil them again? Oh, jeez. Why didn't he come sooner? You know, I'm all ready, and it's such a hassle. But we go on. Now she's describing. My lover thrusts his hand through the latch. He's trying to get in, but apparently he wasn't able to unlatch it. She locked it. My heart began to pound. So now she's getting, her blood pressure is going up. I arose to open for my lover, and my hands dripped with myrrh, and my fingers with flowing myrrh on the handles of the lock. I opened for my lover, but my lover had left. He was gone. My heart sank at his departure. I looked for him, but did not find him. I called him, but he did not answer. It's really sad. You know, it's almost as sad as the one in Jeremiah where the harvest is past and we're not saved. He's gone. She waited too long. So, can we put ourselves in the picture? Jesus is knocking today, and he's asking to come in. And he wants to fellowship with us. He knocks gently. He doesn't kick down the door like a SWAT team. He doesn't huff and puff and blow the door down like the wolf in the story of the 3 little pigs. He gently knocks. Will we let him in? Or do we leave him waiting on the outside? He calls us by his word. He calls us by his spirit. He speaks to the heart, asking to come in, no matter what we've done, no matter what we're guilty of. We studied in the Sabbath school lesson about forgiveness. He forgives us. No matter the past, there's nothing that should keep us from responding. No matter how far we've fallen, no matter how long we've been away, he's standing at the door, asking to come in. And no matter how phony our faith has been, he asks to come in and fellowship with us. And if we open the door, he will come in. So let's read this passage again. But this time, let's put our name in this. Behold, I stand at the door and knock. If, Gary, Scott. Well, put your name in there. Hears my voice and opens the door. I will come in to him or her and dine with him or her, and she or he with me. Holman Hunt painted a picture. It's kind of a dark picture, isn't it? But this was the one from Holman Hunt. He painted this picture about 1883, I think, and he entitled it "The Light of the World." You see Jesus standing there at the door knocking. The vines, the weeds and stuff are growing up. The door is old and weathered. And what's unusual about this painting is what? There's no doorknob on the outside. The knob's on the inside. If the door is going to be opened, it has to be opened from the inside. And the picture that he painted is very true to what Jesus is doing here. He's asking us to open the door. Now, we're probably thinking that, well, I've opened the door long ago and invited Jesus to come in. So we might press the imagery a little bit, press it a little bit further. Have we invited him in and we sat him down in the living room? And not inviting him into other chambers of our heart. You know, are there doors in our life that are shut to him? Perhaps the door behind which we nurse bitterness against someone who has wronged us or slighted us or offended us in some way. And we kind of nurse that pity party. And do we let Jesus into that door, into that room? But he's knocking on that door as well. He wants to come in and take away the bitterness and give us his love and his peace and his acceptance. So we need to open that door as well. Or perhaps we retreat behind a door where we nurture envy and anger and lust. And Jesus is knocking on that door as well. Do we prefer that he just stay out in the living room and we have a nice place there for him? And then there's the entertainment room. Perhaps now I'm moving from preaching to meddling. But there's the entertainment room. Do we invite him in there? Or would we prefer that he stay outside and let us watch what we want to watch? Would we be uncomfortable if Jesus were with us in the entertainment room? And then there's the throne room. The room where we invite him in and make him the Lord of Lords in our life. That we submit everything in our life to him. So Jesus is asking, I believe, to come into every room of our heart. He wants to be part of every area of our lives. So this morning I'm asking, let's just open every door of every room in our heart and invite him to come in. Invite Jesus to heal and to restore and to cleanse and to dwell forever in our hearts. Perhaps it's a little inconvenient, or perhaps some are too lukewarm, as Jesus says the church in Laodicea is. Or we can say, Lord, come into my heart today. And my prayer is that every one of us will open our heart today and say, Lord, come in. He's knocking. He wants to come in. Invite him in.